Hello, I'm Eric Corman, CEO at League of Education Voters and the parent of a rising high school senior of the global majority in the public school system who is accessing special education services, is a first-generation immigrant, comes from a background of trauma, and identifies as LGBTQ+. I advocate because of my son, so that every student can get what they need, when they need it, and how they need it. This webinar features closed captions. To access captioning, just click on the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. Spanish interpretation is also available. To access this webinar in Spanish, in your webinar controls at the bottom of your screen, click Interpretation, which is the icon that looks like a globe, and then click Spanish. If you want to hear only Spanish without the original English in the background, click Mute Original Audio. Special thanks to Alicia Linera-Bidi, who is our interpreter. If you have any technical issues, feel free to use the chat function, which I will monitor throughout the webinar. In case you're not familiar with us, League of Education Voters is a statewide nonprofit working with families, educators, and leaders to create learning environments where every Washington student feels safe, supported, and a positive sense of belonging so that they can achieve academically and access the life they choose. Our website is educationvoters.org. We believe that education is a tool for justice. One of the systems that perpetuate racial and disability injustice experienced by global majority communities is our schools. We believe every student deserves an excellent public education that provides equitable opportunities for success. In order to achieve this, we must pursue radical change in our school systems for equity, justice, and liberation. We must build schools and systems that honor the humanity in every student. Welcome to our online webinar series, Lunchtime Webinars. We started this series 13 years ago to share information and build knowledge on important and timely issues. Today's webinar is about reclaiming student attention, Spokane's Engage in Real Life initiative, and the momentum for statewide cell phone-free schools. Across Washington State and the nation, educators, families, and students are grappling with a critical question. How do we create school environments that foster focus, connection, and well-being in a world of constant digital distraction? In today's webinar, we will spotlight Spokane Public Schools' innovative Engage in Real Life IRL program, a district-wide initiative designed to help students build healthier relationships with technology by limiting cell phone use during the school day. Grounded in student voice, community engagement, and a commitment to academic and social-emotional growth, Spokane's approach is quickly becoming a model for others exploring the benefits of phone-free learning environments. We will also feature students from across Washington State offering firsthand perspectives on how cell phone use shapes their learning, relationships, and well-being, and statewide policymakers and advocates discussing the growing momentum behind a proposed K-12 cell phone ban in Washington and what it could mean for schools, educators, and families. And now I'd like to ask our panelists to introduce yourselves, starting with Darsh. Darsh, feel free to popcorn to whoever you'd like to go next.
My name is Darsh, and I'm a rising junior at Mount Si High School, and I am joining this meeting as a panelist. I'll popcorn it to Jaden.
Hi, I'm Jaden. I'm also a rising junior and at Eastlake High School, and I'm also a member of UW's Youth Advisory Board. And last summer, our board dug into survey data from thousands of students, teachers, and parents on phone policies and published our findings. So I'm here to bring the student level perspective here. Thank you. And I like to popcorn it to Isha.
Hi, my name is Isha, and I'm a rising sophomore at Bellevue High School. And I'm passionate about education and seeing how policies surrounding education are changing in our everyday lives. And I'm excited to be part of this webinar today.
And Isha, who would you like to pass it to?
I'll popcorn it to Miss Liz.
Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Troutman. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director at Stand for Children Washington. We're a statewide nonprofit advocacy organization that serves as a unique catalyst for educational success and social progress. And I'm also the parent of a 7-year-old who is a rising second grader. So I feel very committed to understanding and creating a set of policies that will work not just for current students, but also for students who are just embarking on their educational journey. And I will pass it over to Dr. Swinyard.
Thanks, Liv. My name's Adam Swinyard. I'm a dad of a rising junior, rising 8th grader, and rising 5th grader. And I'm also the superintendent of Spokane Public Schools. And I'll pass it to Jenny.
Thanks, Dr. Swinyard. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Jenny Plaja, and I'm with the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. Share a little more about my role in our work later. Why I'm here today. Since I was little, I wanted to be an educator. School for me was a safe place. And so after teaching in the Peace Corps, I developed a deeper kind of interest and understanding of the United States, specifically Washington education policy, as I was working to understand how school systems vary across different countries. And that landed me here at the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, where I've been for 13 years now. I'm a mom of 2 girls, a rising 3rd grader, and then she's 9 months today, so a 9-month-old. And it's really a privilege to be a part of the public school policy world, and then also get to kind of reap the benefits of that by watching my daughters enter the system and learn and grow alongside their colleagues. So thanks for being here. I will pass it to Ben.
Hi, my name is Ben Folgers. I am a 13-year educator. I teach high school English in the Highline School District. And I'm also going to be kind of speaking from the union side of things, the Washington education side of things.
Great. Thanks so much for being here, all of you. And I just want to say that Darsh and Jaden and Isha are also here on behalf of the Association of Washington Student Leaders, the AWSL. To begin today's LEVinar, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the ancestral and unceded traditional lands of the 29 federally recognized and non-federally recognized tribes in Washington state, including the Chehalis, Colville, Cowlitz, Hoh, Jamestown S'Klallam, Kalispel, Lower Elwha Klallam, Lummi, Makah, Muckleshoot, Nisqually, Nooksack, Port Gamble S'Klallam, Puyallup, Quileute, Quinault, Samish, Soxhawtla, Shoalwater Bay, Skokomish, Snoqualmie, Spokane, Squaxin Island, Stillaguamish, Suquamish, Swinomish, Tulalip, Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, Upper Skagit, and Yakima. We give thanks to elders both past and present, our Native and Indigenous colleagues, and the land itself. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. You'll notice a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. This is a space for you to submit questions to us. If time permits, we'll have about 10 minutes for questions after the panel discussion wraps up. As always, feel free to send any feedback about the webinar quality to us on the chat function or at info@educationvoters.org. And speaking of the chat function, you're welcome to use it to check in and comment on anything you hear. Welcome, Darsh, Isha, Jaden, Dr. Swinyard, Ben, Jenny, and Liz. We'll start with Dr. Swinyard talking about Spokane's Engage IRL program, and then we'll move to Jenny and Liz talking about possible policy for statewide K-12 cell phones, and then move to Ben, and then we'll go to Jaden. And then Darsh and Isha and Jaden, feel free to chime in and with questions, lived experience, anything that you might reflect upon while the conversation is going on. So with that, Dr. Swinyard, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Well, I really appreciate the space being set up today to have this conversation. I think it's one of the most important conversations that we're having about the youth experience and about our school systems, not just in Washington State, but across the country. Something that I think is reasonable to conclude that we've observed the last 15 plus years is just a steady disengagement from kids in their school experience. And ultimately, we want every kid, no matter who you are, where you come from, what your background is, what challenges you may face, We want every single kid to feel connected and to enjoy and see the relevancy of their school experience. And that's part of the dream of public education that's over 250 years old, is that everyone has an opportunity for a bright, happy, and successful future through education. And that's big work, and we're still chasing that dream. And we know that, over the years and in that 250-year journey, there's been a lot of challenges that have presented themselves that we've had to collectively think about and co-construct. And that's part of the evolution of our public schools. And I think there's a lot to be proud of, but a lot of work. As we have observed that last 15 years steady disengagement from school, it manifests itself in a lot of ways. It could be in rising chronic absenteeism. It could be kids coming to school and not feeling motivated to really participate and engage in the classroom experience. So it can manifest itself in a lot of ways. And it's reasonable to conclude that, what's the antecedent of that disengagement? There's probably a litany of things. We could probably have a webinar every day for an hour and talk about all the different antecedents that have maybe contributed to that. I think it's fair to conclude, and there's mounting empirical evidence that's showing us that the metastasizing of technology in our lives and the amount of time that all of us are spending on personal devices is changing how we feel about the physical world and the spaces that we're in. And so that in Spokane has given us a lot to think about and a lot to be concerned. We should be concerned about all of our sleep health. When you look at how much time we're spending on devices, we should be concerned about kids' sleep health. And also we should be concerned about what they're ingesting, not just how much sleep they're losing, but what we're all taking in. And I'm not here to plant a flag and be demonstrative about all technology, because there's many beautiful things about technology and how it can transcend barriers, and it can ignite and be a catalyst for equity. There's lots of virtuous things about technology, but we shouldn't assume that all things about technology are virtuous, and we should be skeptical of the role that it's playing in our lives and how it's changing our life experiences, and particularly relevant to this experience, this conversation, the youth experience. I think what has not helped us in this conversation is the pandemic. I don't think the pandemic has caused some of the things that we are seeing in our youth and some of the challenges they're facing, and particularly as it relates to the intersectionality with technology. But I think it is very reasonable to assert that the pandemic exasperated and accelerated how technology is influencing our lives, and in many ways normalized the amount of time we spend looking at a screen. It normalized isolating in our homes, not gathering in public spaces and settings. And so in Spokane, as we came out of that experience, like many school districts and many student bodies and staff across the country, we're spending a lot of time talking about where do we go from here. We know we have a lot of kids struggling coming out of the pandemic. We know that we've seen an accelerant of mental health challenges and some other really detrimental social determinants. And so we started talking, where do we do? Where do we go? And we're not going to be able to go take all the devices away. Like they are a part of our lives. And I think it's probably not realistic to say we're going to purge personal devices from all of our daily lives, unless you're going off grid out into the Cascades or something. And so for us, we tried to think about really a holistic approach, and that started with community learning. I think learning together and talking together, kids and adults, not just adults telling kids what their problems are and then telling them what the solutions will be, but really involving kids in that process and learning together about what's happening with screens. We did a community book study with The Anxious Generation, written by Jonathan Haidt, and did a lot of learning together around why are the rates of suicidal ideation going up since 2008? Why are we seeing an increase of anxiety and depression? Why are the number of kids getting their driver's license plummeting? What are the antecedents to that? Like there's been some pretty dramatic shifts in the childhood experience. So we did a lot of community learning together to try to ground ourselves in the why to the greatest extent possible. We're a district with over 30,000 kids and 6,000 employees. So, that's no easy thing, but we really tried to learn together. We did viewings of Screenager, which is a great documentary done by UW. Again, really tried to ground ourselves in the why. And then we moved into a conversation about what role do personal devices play in our schools. And again, we spent a lot of time taking input, talking with kids, and we made a revision to our cell phone policy and personal device policy in our school. So middle and high school, or elementary and middle, it's bell to bell, no devices. And at high school, where we landed in Spokane, was no personal devices in the classroom, but kids are allowed to use them during passing periods and at lunch. And that there's a lot of reasons we landed on that decision. That it's been a very positive shift for us, K-12. I think we'll continue to listen and reflect and follow along with the conversations that are happening at a state level about how best to move forward. But that's been a really popular shift. Maybe the most important aspect of our plan moving forward, though, was our Engage in Real Life initiative. Because ultimately, what we're really talking about at its core, again, is we want every kid to feel connected and feel like they belong to school and that they want to be there. And as much as the adults would like to believe that our kids are coming to school for the science textbook, they're probably not. They're coming because there's things at school that they enjoy, and there's relationships at school that they enjoy. Now, I absolutely hope that the science experience becomes a catalyst to a dream and a passion about a career pathway, but that probably doesn't sit at the core of what ultimately motivates most kids to go to school. And so that's why we really tried to be thoughtful about, so what is that? What does that look like? And what are ways we can nurture that? And it starts with a positive school culture, and it starts with centering everything we do about relationships. Engage in Real Life has really been about, let's try to be practical and no, we're not going to take all the screens away. But what we can practically do is say, instead of 6, 7, 8 hours a day on your personal device, how about maybe 1 or 2 hours a day on a personal device? And instead of using that time for a personal device, how about we try to connect you to a wide range of experiences and activities where you can be together with other people doing healthy, positive activities. And so our Engage in Real Life initiatives have been about every kid every day doing something after school, let's stay out of our homes. Let's stay off the devices and let's be together in real life. And so we've had a significant increase in the number of clubs, number of athletic experiences, the arts, really, you name it. We have everything. We have knitting clubs, we have fly fishing clubs, we have Dungeons and Dragons, we have a high school with a cheese club. We have a high school that has 7 sub-varsity volleyball teams because we've said, hey, we want every kid to participate. We want every kid to be connected and be involved. We actually had a senior night for our C Squad volleyball team at one of our high schools. We had the flowers, we had all the families and the posters and the signs and the hugs, and that's usually an experience that has only been precluded to a varsity team that has kind of made it through the weeding out of who's good enough to play varsity. We said, no, we want anyone who wants to play volleyball to play volleyball, and we've really taken that approach and applied it across a really broad landscape. It has been unimaginably successful. We're bursting at the seams to the point that our community was fortunate to pass a bond initiative to build more courts and more fields, to update our auditoriums so that we can accommodate this really massive increase in participation. And then, to wrap up this little vignette of our journey is now really looking at, so like, what's the outcome of that work? And what we've seen is kids that are participating in our Engage in IRL program are experiencing 2 or more activities in the course of a year, which is not a super high bar, have 20% lower chronic absenteeism. We've seen double-digit increases in literacy in mathematics. We've seen significant reductions in student behavior challenges. We've seen the collection in our middle school libraries have gone up. Just lots of interesting things have shifted as we've really tried to make this a focus. And also, it's so much of it is about kids finding their people. And if your people are in welding club, that's great. Go hang out with your people in welding club. If your people are on an athletic team, that's great. Go be with your people. If your people are in performing arts, or we have amazing cultural clubs, we have a cricket club. I mean, so many different great experiences for kids to find their people and their relationships and that sense of belonging and connection to school. So it's been really successful. We're really proud of the work that we're doing, and also still big work to do. I appreciate Jaden referencing they've done some surveying. We've done some surveying with our kids. They don't love the cell phone policy. They're not throwing roses, and they're not cheering, and they're not sending. I haven't got a single thank you card yet from a kid. But I do think by starting with the why, there's this cognition amongst our kids. Our kids are brilliant. I have no doubt what we're going to hear from the students on the webinar today. There's such immense brilliance in this generation of students. And I do think there is a growing recognition among them that would they prefer to have their device on them so that they could do what they want to do on that device at any moment? I think probably, yeah. Do they recognize that that's not the most healthy thing for them? I think they do. Just like I think our kids recognize that broccoli is probably pretty good for you, but they don't all love broccoli. And so I think we have to just be really mindful about, how we're all coming into this space, how we're feeling about it, and being really open and honest with it. And then also being willing to have conversations about, okay, so how could we make it better? And what tweaks do we need to make? And how can we do a better job at making it consistent across our schools? So yeah, again, really appreciate the chance to share, and looking forward to hearing from others today in the conversation.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Swinyard. And Darsh, Isha, and Jaden, I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond to what you just heard. Do you have any questions? Do you have any comments, any life experience or experience with your peers that might be relevant?
Yeah, I'd definitely say that I see that really prevalent in my high school, because in like the beginning of the time when they were really cracking down on the phone policy, I was seeing that like a lot of people would be interactive during lunch, participate in more like out of school or elective kind of things. But recently, like we've been kind of lenient towards the cell phone policy, so a lot of people have been like not really interactive and just going on their phones during lunch and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I
Also,
feel like overall that like students, we've just seen them become like so glued to their phones that like almost like people forget school is also not just a place to learn, but to have social interaction. So I hope that like as with the phone bans and phone policies, we can kind of start to see more of that social interaction come back.
first, I want to thank Dr. Swinyard, and honestly, listening to you describe Engage IRL and everything you just said, the finding your people, the clubs, the subversity teams where everyone gets a senior night. I think that's exactly what students in our data were asking for. You mentioned something really important. Kids know broccoli is good for them, but they don't love it. That's the buying problem right there. So our survey found the same thing. Students aren't saying no thank you because they hate the phone policy. I think they're saying okay, fine, because they hate because they get why, and because there's actually something better to do. And what you built with Engage IRL, the chess clubs, the flying fishing, the cheese club, finding where your people are, that's what makes the policy actually work. It's not the restriction alone. So I think it's the whole ecosystem. So when state moves forward, that's what we are asking them to protect. Um, we should like don't just ban phones. Um, I think we should build the reasons why kids would want to put them down. So I think that's Spokane's real model, and I think it works.
Yeah, and Ben, Liz, and Jenny, if you've got any comments or questions for Dr. Swinyard, feel free to pop in as well before we move on.
I have a question. So as an educator, hearing the students talk about it's not just the restriction, it's the whole ecosystem. You've created these opportunities that are outside of the school day, sports, extracurriculars, etc., that have engaged students more. I'm wondering what else has happened in Spokane inside of the classroom to also encourage the students to want to be in class and engaged in class and not on their phones.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to that. What makes a kid in a classroom want to learn and be there and be engaged? I think ultimately, do they have a positive, healthy relationship with their teacher? I think that sits at the foundation of success in the classroom. And if kids feel a connection and they feel cared for and they feel like they have a relationship with their teacher and their teacher cares about them and knows things about them, then again, I think everything in the teaching and learning process orbits around relationships. And so the extent to which that classroom has created a sense of community and connection and kids feel safe and they feel seen and heard, then I have in my career been in so many thousands of classrooms and then seen every pedagogical approach you can imagine, from direct instruction to constructionism to the workshop model to the this and to the that and to the one-to-one to all the things, right? And one common theme, one common thread is what's that connection and relationship like between the teacher and the student? And when that exists and when that is vibrant, kids' level of motivation, I think is really special and different. And so that's been a big part of our focus coming out of the pandemic, is really trying to think about how do we build positive relationships and connections, and how do we build a sense of community in our classroom? And are there kids in our high school that go through an entire day and no one says their name? And I think that's an awful thought for any of us, to think that there are maybe kids in a 2,000 kid high school, and what if no one says their name all day? What if they go to every single class, they sit there, they go to lunch, like no one ever says their name, no one ever has a personal connection with them? I think it's plausible to say that happens. So we've had a big push around that. Obviously, I think there's, of course, intersectionality with relevant curriculum. Do kids see the purpose in schooling? Is there intentional lesson planning? Are we meeting the needs of all kids? Are we differentiating in a way that all kids can access the experience? So I think that's big, hard work, Ben. And as somebody who's in the classroom, you know how hard it is to be a teacher. You got 150 kids, and hey, build a positive connection with all 150, differentiate for all 150, and make a relevant experience for all 150. Okay, now go. So hopefully you're getting some rest this summer, Ben. But I do think it does have to start with relationships. And if kids don't feel a sense of community relationship in the classroom, really all those other things that we know are essential ingredients are going to be finite in their ability to impact kids. So I think a different conversation for a different day with technology is what role does ed tech play in all this? And there's lots of really interesting conversations happening nationally and in K-12 circles around one-to-one and how much should we be using devices in the teaching and learning process? What role should AI play? So it's different but connected. I bring it up because sometimes people blur those lines and they say, I thought we were phone free. Why does the teacher have the kids on a laptop? And it's like, well, because we need that laptop and we want to leverage it in the teaching and learning process. That's different than the conversation around personal devices, separate but connected.
Yeah. Liz or Jenny, any reflections or questions before we move on to both of you?
Just underscoring, I think what you said, Dr. Swinyard, about the relationship is just repeats across, I think, so many things. We're not talking today about the ninth grade success initiative, but that is kind of at the core of that work too, is building belonging for ninth graders the first moment they walk into a high school. So that exactly what you said, they're people that know their name and see them for who they are and kind of support around them. And that translates directly into their academic success. And so I think it's really critical.
One thing I would add related to Ben's question around changes in the classroom is another thing that is connected to, but a little different than just the relationship building, is we've been hearing that students had a fear of being recorded. And so their engagement, they were embarrassed to answer questions or to participate or to give up and, speak in front of their peers and their classmates because of the potential bullying or the potential people taking an embarrassing picture or something. So there's this other element where phones have just added this layer of complexity to youth engagement. So I think that being taken out, we've heard that participation and real engagement, not just really relationship building, but engagement with the content and with the learning is able to like bloom a little better because there's just one layer removed to help students kind of come show up and be themselves. So that's just another element I wanted to add.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, well, with that, Liz and Jenny, now the floor is yours to talk about potential statewide policy.
Awesome. So I'm going to kick off, and I have a few slides that I'll share. Give me just a moment because I've lost my share screen. Okay, there we go. All right. So again, Liz with Stand for Children, talking about a way for the day cell phone policy. My hope today is really to focus a little bit on the data and kind of national policy context to lead into Jenny will speak a little bit more specifically about Washington State and what's happening here. But just as we get started, I mentioned a little bit the ninth grade success initiative that STAND works on. As we also work on equitable access to dual credit, as well as justice reform. And we really root our policy and implementation work on what the research shows will have the greatest impact on young people's outcomes, really. And so that's really where I'm going to focus today is some of the quantitative and qualitative research that's grounding our approach to this issue here in Washington. So kind of the first and foremost is that phones are quite literally at this point designed to be distracting. And they don't actually need to ring or to make noise to be disruptive. I think Dr. Swinyard referenced sleep quality and all of that very correlated to physically where your phone is, even if it's not making noise. So this is research that Dr. Angela Duckworth is conducting and really showing, and it's, there's lots of ways that people have done similar research, but that essentially where your phone is while you're studying has kind of predictive power for your spring GPA. I saw a very cool math project out of a middle school where a math teacher had students record how many hours of sleep they got at night and where their phone was in their house when they slept. And again, found this correlation between folks who didn't have the phone in the room with them had more sleep. And again, small sample, but we see this kind of replicated over and over again. So again, that's sort of where the phone is actually really important. It's not just is the phone on or off? It's where's the phone physically to you? The other really important piece of information is that phones are being used a lot in school for non-learning activities. This is Seattle Children's research that surveyed, had sort of trackers on a sample of students' phones and saw that about 23% of the school day, so an hour and a half out of a 6.5 hour school day, was being spent on Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, YouTube, games, messaging, other apps for non-learning activities. That has been replicated in lots of other studies that show that there are definitely students using their phone, not just during passing and lunch, but also in class for non-learning activities. And this is not because students are not motivated, not excited, not engaged, but because smartphones are intentionally designed to be addictive. There was just a big set of articles that came out showing that Instagram was paying student influencers to post content during school so that they could boost the numbers, the amount of engagement that they were getting during school hours, right? The other thing I'll say about this is that high school students, study after study shows, are using their phones more than other grades. So this is a particularly acute problem in high school in terms of phone use. The other set of research that is happening right now is also with Angela Duckworth, who's surveying educators around the country. She's got about 110,000 responses, including, I think, about 4,000 from Washington State. The data that's up here is based on an initial kind of dump of data that she did from the first 20,000 responses. But my understanding is the larger data set kind of replicates the general theme here, which is the stricter a policy that is in place, the higher the satisfaction from teachers and educators, as well as sort of the higher the student focus. And so I think what's important here is that you have a few different options, right? There's no policy, and that could be each individual teacher has their own policy in their class. You could have a schedule-based restriction, which is, again, you're allowed during passing and lunch, or maybe just at lunch, but you're not allowed in the classroom. Or you can have a full kind of bell to bell or away for the day policy. Within that away for the day policy, that can look very different school to school. You've got getting them collected in the classroom, you've got storing them in lockers, you've got keeping them in pouches, you've got just not showing them at all, or not having phones on campus. And again, what we see here is that the stricter the policy, meaning the less access the student has to the phone, the happier educators are. And again, I'm really interested to hear Jaden talk a little bit more about the student survey, but certainly educators really appreciate that. But they also report that there's a lot less misuse of the phone in classrooms, right? So like the more strict the policy is, the more you see students not using them in the classroom. So I think it's really critical. Schedule-based restriction, like not having it in class, but having it other times, still much better than no policy at all, as you can see on the right. And a bell-to-bell restriction is going to be like your strongest policy there. But again, I think this gives a really a lot of options to schools and school districts for deciding what is the right kind of implementation strategy for them based on their context. If you don't have lockers in your school, obviously locker is not going to be a great option for you. But if you do, there's like sort of a built-in way that you can implement this policy pretty effectively. And her bigger research data set will be out later this summer, so actually really timely for our conversations in Washington. We followed up, what we were hearing from Dr. Duckworth with qualitative interviews with superintendents and building administrators from around the country in a broad mix of school types. And really like their experiences mirrored what that kind of large data set showed, that in the schools that were happy, in the districts that were happiest with how their policy was working, they had sort of four things in common. The cell phones are turned off during the day. They are physically stored away from the student. There's good communication. And that, again, I think speaks to Dr. Swinyard's point about the why, like communicating the why and the how and the, those alternative opportunities for connection. And that there's enforcement. And I want to say something about enforcement here because I think it's really critical that we are not using punitive or exclusionary discipline to enforce. This is not about kids getting in trouble for using their phone, but it's rather that there's sort of a clear sort of non-confrontational way for a teacher or an administrator to let the student know that they are in violation of the policy and do something about it. Usually that looks like sort of progressive discipline of like the phone gets confiscated or turned into the office. There may need to be a parent phone call or guardian phone call and sort of from there. So lots of different ways this can look, but it's really important that we're not using this to actually drive exclusionary discipline where we're suspending kids from class or from school. And again, those kind of four gold standard options for what policies are in place. Many of you have seen a study that came out earlier this year from the National Bureau of Economic Research, and I think the headlines were like, cell phone policies are mixed. The reality is this was intended to be a pretty small study of the impact of Yonder pouches, which are lockable magnetic pouches. And what they did find was a significant reduction in phone use, a significant increase in student mental health, a significant increase in teacher satisfaction, and no impact on attendance or test scores. And I don't know that they were expecting to see those things since so many other things impact both of those, like attendance and test scores have trends that predated the use of cell phones and that have a lot of complex factors. So I just want to put those findings in context. The little figure on the left there is very small, and I apologize, but I think it shows something that's already come up, which is that both young people and parents predicted benefits from a policy before it was put into place, and Still, parents supported and students did not support the existence of the policy. I'm really curious, and again, Jaden, I don't know if this is going to be part of what you speak to, but like once a policy is put in place, do student perspectives shift? And I think we've seen that on small scales, but I'm curious on a larger scale. Lastly, I'll say, Washington is increasingly really in a small minority of states that has no statewide policy requirement here. And 23 states actually have away for the day, either inaccessible storage or accessible storage policies at the state level. So again, lots and lots and lots of schools have figured out how to do this. And I will also note that among the states that have no policy in place or have policy pending, none of them are going the other direction. In other words, states have taken action to make their policies stronger at the state level. No one has rolled that back. So Illinois just passed a stronger policy. Indiana's policy went from instruction time only to bell to bell. So that's kind of the trend nationally. And lots of perspectives. This is just like a little bit of a sampling of some of the voices that we've heard from principals and parents and students. And then I'll pop in the chat after this our guide for educators, which I think sums up a lot of what I've shared today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jenny, who can speak a lot more to what's happening in Washington and what are we looking ahead for next year.
Couldn't find my mute after I shared screen. Screen look good to everybody? All right, thanks so much, Liz and Dr. Swinyard and our smart and amazing youth who are here. It's so good to have the student perspective. So again, Jenny Plaja, Chief Impact Officer at OSPI. Part of my role is supporting policy, budget work, both from implementation to proposals and thinking about what the statewide perspectives are and what we need as far as statewide budget and policy goes. So I'll move kind of quickly through this because I want to make sure we have time for discussion and Q&A. So in August of 2024, OSPI issued guidance about cell phone and smart device use in schools, which really was too late. We had been tracking this for a long time. We're working on it. Finally, it was like, we've got to get this message out there for those who haven't already been doing the work and taking the steps to move it. Superintendent Reichelt urged districts along with this in his communication to take this step. And because of that, we were able to engage in some really productive and powerful discussions across the state about the purpose of public ed and the modern day distractions with the system. So a lot of media coverage and people coming out of the woodworks to talk from parents and families and community partners, students, and obviously district officials and educators. One of the challenges, obviously, is that cell phone use amongst young people exploded really before our system could process and keep up. In 2022, 95% of what is going on with my slides? 95% of US teenagers had smartphones, up from 73% in 2014-15. So that's an old statistic. It's probably even more, it's guaranteed even more today, which is wild when you think about it, of like what that has done to the experience of being in school. In a 2024 National Education Association survey of educators, this is along the lines of stuff you've already heard from them, nationwide, 79% of educators who still allow cell phones said they find them disruptive. Additionally, 90% of educators said they would support restrictions on cell phone use during instructional time. OSPI has been monitoring the impact of phones in schools, and in particular, the impact that screens and social media in particular have on student well-being, the ability to focus, the ability to learn, and thinking, what is our role as a state in kind of protecting that space for our young people? In addition to issuing guidance, OSPI added questions about cell phone use to our annual education technology survey. So we added questions in spring of 2025. So that was gathering data from 2 school years ago. At that time, 2 school years back, 210 districts said they have some version of a cell phone policy in place, with an additional 12 districts planning to adopt a policy by the 25-26 school year. So we're like, this is great. Momentum is building. Between 2024 to 2026, we saw a really big surge in policy adoption. 84 districts just in that time adopted policies. So then over The past year, as more and more districts worked with their communities to adopt policy, we were looking at the policies. We've been able to learn more about the process and getting there, the importance of working together with families and youth to understand the why behind it, and then also the positive impacts we see when students are able to show up and be present in their learning. Since then, OSPI has been working with legislators and various partners across the state on proposed legislation that would require school districts to adopt a policy to restrict cell phone use at school. This last session, we were disappointed that what emerged was yet another study. So we are completing that study and we will have a report. But really, we think we need to move faster. So where are we now? What is the survey telling us now? In the most recent survey of districts from this spring, of the 82% of school districts, charter schools, and state tribal compact schools who responded, nearly 1/3 reported that they do not have a policy in place. So again, I think there's been so much momentum building that some districts said, yeah, we have a policy, but it's like a policy that mentions cell phones, not necessarily a policy that's centered around the use of cell phones in schools. About 44% reported that each school within the district may adopt their own policy. So this is starting to lead to really fragmented implementation within individual communities. So some of the other trends we're noticing as we're actually diving in and reading the policy, most districts have some kind of policy in place. However, some, they have a policy, but it just says that it's encouraged. So it's unclear to the extent that it's being implemented, especially across individual buildings. Very few are kind of that strict bell to bell, start to end of the school day across all grades. So we've heard it's more common for there to be flexibility in high schools. Most districts with a policy don't differentiate between grades. It's kind of that school setting, and it's more common for there to be more restrictions in the elementary and middle grades with additional flexibility in high school. Finally, one of the last kind of trends we noticed is that not all districts' cell phone policies are easy to find on their website, or we find that the information is only included in the student handbook. And we've really learned from our leaders in the state, our district folks who have done this, that it is so important to have that strong partnership with families and transparency around what the expectations are. So that was another thing that is kind of a flag to us, is this should be, all district policies I think should be really clear, but this one in particular. Also from our survey this spring, 57% of school districts who have a policy that limits mobile device use reported a decrease in disruptions during instructional time. 50% reported an increase in student engagement, and 40% reported an increase in interactions between students. So while we're hearing all these positive impacts and seeing progress across the state, one of the biggest barriers noted in this survey to barriers to implementation is inconsistent expectation, whether that be from educator to educator in different classes, allowing them to have their own rules as it gets hard. If you're the teacher who wants to kind of crack down on it and students are saying, well, but so-and-so lets me. And so the same across schools and expectations for families. So that brings us to where OSPI is at now. We really want to focus on this change in school culture. It's not something that's being taken away. So I appreciate that the conversation's already been going here. It's what are we giving back to students? Space for critical thinking, for friendships, for face-to-face conversations, just permission to be themselves in school and to show up and to engage. The change is hard. It's different, especially for our young people now who have had cell phones in their life since they were born. But it's so important that we take that next step. OSPI is going to be proposing an away for the day. We stopped using bell for bell because some districts are implementing bell for bell to really mean class bells, so instructional time. And what we really mean is away for the day, stored from start to end of the school day, stored away, left at home, leave some decision-making up to districts for how they implement that. But to Liz's point, if you don't have lockers, we don't prescribe that level of detail at the state. But it does include passing periods, lunch, and other school day events or programming. We are going to introduce it so that it's inclusive of high school, though, as the bill moves through the legislative process, we definitely want to hear if there's, a lot of pressure to keep some flexibility at the state. That would be up to the legislature to decide. But thinking about the use of phones for high school students, and how, you go out in passing, you see a video that really disrupts, whether it's news or, something concerning that you see, how that can just shift your mindset and your ability to focus and think when you do go back into that classroom. So we do think it's important to have it be all grades. When you're at school, it's time to learn and be at school. We want to make sure there's exemptions for, emergency situations, or there's a plan in place for that use that's required by a student's IEP or 504 plan. There's health monitoring or other documented medical necessities. Of course, we want to make sure that we have those in place so that students can access those important tools. So this way, our goal is so families, students, educators can all expect really clear rules and expectations. And then that we're enforcing reliable ways to contact students during the school day. We've done it before, we can bring it back. And that the communication from the school to the parents and to the family is really consistent and uniform. So that's it for me. I'm open to questions. My contact information is here, and I'll share the slides. But I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Jenny. And Ben, as an ELA teacher who brought this issue to the membership of the Washington Education Association, what would you like to see in terms of statewide policy?
Yeah, I think honestly, a lot of the things were kind of hit on. There needs to be a policy that is the same at the state level, that can be passed on to district, that can be passed on to school. As Jenny mentioned, when we don't have something that is at the legislative body, what we see is that fragmented implementation. My school, Mount Rainier High School in the Highline District, we started off really strong this year with a cell phone policy, but over time, burnout, and being like the one teacher, as also Jenny mentioned, who's consistently implementing that policy, it leads to honestly the policy just being more lenient and not enforced, which I think Darsh kind of hit on earlier. In general, as an ELA teacher, cell phones have, as everyone said, it's led to decreased attention in class. There's more AI usage, and there's really less opportunities to connect with peers. Last year, I think it was, Highline was hacked. And it was, on one hand, really terrible, especially because our school year went into the summer. But on the other hand, it was also like this really beautiful moment. There was no Wi-Fi. We couldn't use any of our one-to-one devices. There was no Wi-Fi for the students to connect to be on their phones, right? And during that time, I saw in my classroom more and more students connecting with each other, connecting with me, connecting with the curriculum that we have. And I think that, going back to this, the lack of implementation, I think lots of times what you'll hear educators say is that I can't enforce this because I don't have the backing from my administrator. And then the administrators will kind of pump that up the chain to say we don't have backing from the district, and the district will say the same about the state. So there needs to be something that we can all kind of rely on to say, like, no, we have this enforcement mechanism in place and it's kind of mandated by law. Yeah. I think like some things to kind of hit on, though, is that like a law at the legislative level does not mean that this problem is ultimately solved, like with the snap of a finger. Educators still need to be confident in their ability to manage a classroom, right? We also need to create classrooms that are safe communities for all students. We need to design our classroom and our curriculum so that we're not only engaging our students, but it's also reflective of their diversity. Sometimes I do worry about a law because it could lead to this maybe over-policing of students. And so the non-punitive measures that Liz was talking about, I think are also really important, but also that comes with training. And so coming from kind of the education and also the union side of things, I think with the law, there also needs to come funding from the state legislature. So many of our districts right now are in budget crises in which we are facing even more cuts, right? We're losing more educators. So this in the state and especially the federal government, chronically underfund education. So we can't like mandate something like this without also providing funding for the training, the support, and the implementation of these policies. The Yonder pouches, great idea, but they're expensive, right? And so what does that look like in all of our different contexts, as was mentioned earlier? If the state's going to say you need to have a policy, then the state also needs to provide the money to back that. I'll also say that this isn't just like a teacher problem. This is also like I use the term educator to be inclusive of our education support professionals, our paraeducators. Um, they are also some of the like lowest paid people within our school districts. And I couldn't do my job without the paras that are in my room to support me, right? And so we need to ensure that those educators are also wrapped into the support, the implementation. They need to receive a living wage, right? So that the state needs to provide the funding to support all of those things, or else it's just going to lead to more fragmented implementation. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, that's wonderful perspective, Ben. I really appreciate you sharing. In the last few minutes here, I know Jaden, you'd like to share some of the work you did through the University of Washington, and then I'd like to give each of you an opportunity for any final thoughts you'd like to share. So Jaden, what did you learn?
First, I would like to thank everyone, and I want to add one thing that didn't come up yet, but matters a lot. So when we ask students why they don't participate or speak up in class, a huge barrier was fear. I think fear of being recorded, as one of the panelists said, fear of embarrassment, fear of what could happen to that photo or video. That fear goes away when phones aren't there. That alone changes engagement. But I also heard something really important from Lise and Jenny. So right now, every district is doing its own thing. Some schools have a policy, some don't. Same kid goes from one class where phones are fine to another class where they're banned. So that inconsistency is exhausting. So for teachers like Ben who are enforcing it alone, and for students trying to figure out the rules, and also I think Dr. Swinyard said very perfectly. Relationships are everything, but you can build relationships when kids are scared of being recorded. So, or when there's no consistency or when there's no alternative. So here's what we're asking the state to do. I think we need to make it consistent, make it clear, give districts the framework, but also give them the resources like the clubs, the activities, the partnerships. And I think that's how you build a culture where students want to engage. And I think Spokane is doing really well.
Wonderful. Well, students, I'd like to give you the very last word. So Dr. Swinyard, Liz, Jenny, Ben, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Something I guess I'll add into is that um, we need families to also be in support of this as much as possible. I think the biggest people I hear against the cell phone policies are parents who are, or caring adults who are truly worried about like their kid at school, right? And I think we just need to make partners out of those families, to make sure that they understand, again, like Dr. Swinyard was saying, like what is the why behind this, and like if you need to reach your kid at school, you can still call the main office, right? They can still do the old fashioned interrupt my classroom in the middle of the day and then just do a little announcement to say there's an early dismissal, right? Um, but like we need the caring adults in the students' lives to be on our side and be partners within this process as well.
Great. Yeah, Dr. Swinyard, Liz, Jenny, anything else you'd like to add? And if not, that's fine. Okay, great. So Darsh, Isha, Jaden, any final thoughts that you would like to share too?
Yeah, specifically asking for one of the questions in the chat. Like, I think to basically combat like the family concerns about like reaching their children, and what came up earlier is like what we already talked about it in our school about like when we had a debate about this, but basically it's obviously just like calling the main office because there's not really anything more important that you need to reach your child. So they would basically, and we also have like these people who one of their class periods are like the office attendants. So if the parent needs to like relay a message to the kid, they could call them into the office and then they could talk about it. And I think that would be like really good to bypass like the concerns about communicating with like with your kid.
Yeah, Isha, anything you'd like to share?
And I think the last open question for about AI kind of replacing teachers, I think like we should one thing that maybe we can take away at the end is that besides just like having teachers to teach us the material, they can also be like a support person in the classroom, and that can be valuable for a lot of different students. And I think that's one thing we should keep in mind when we think about school, we should also think about the connections and communication we can make there instead of just the work and seeing it negatively. I think if we just shift our mindset, that can be a good first step in kind of moving away from our current phone surroundings.
Great. And Jaden, is there anything you'd like to leave us with?
Um, it was a really grateful opportunity to share my perspective, and I just want to say thank you for this conversation and hearing all those or these different voices. And I think that's exactly what needs to happen as we move forward. So I'm really grateful to be here.
Great. Well, thank you, Jaden. Thank you, Isha. Thank you, Darsh. Thank you, Dr. Swinyard, Ben, Jenny, and Liz. And thanks to all of you for participating and submitting questions. Our next scheduled webinar will take place on Wednesday, September 16th. Lev partner organization Washington STEM is tackling a growing disconnect. Too many students lack equitable pathways from high school to family-sustaining careers, deepening the state's K-shaped economic divide. Compounding this, there's no unified statewide scorecard or North Star set of outcomes across the education to workforce continuum, making it hard to know what's working and where to focus. With supports from the Schultz Family Foundation and in partnership with Harris X Research, Washington STEM has conducted a landscape analysis, including a deep dive into the King County marketplace to identify where pathways are working, where they break down, who's being left behind, and what we can do to fix the broken marketplace. As an advisory member to this work, League of Education Voters is excited to host this upcoming webinar. Join us to hear these findings and what's next as we build a statewide system that aligns partners, strengthens data use, and drives accountability for student outcomes. Registration information will be shared in the follow-up email and will be on our website, educationvoters.org. Just go to events, then lunchtime webinars. Spanish interpretation and captioning in English will be available. Thank you to each of you for joining us today. If you have additional questions or comments, please send them to me at Eric, A-R-I-K, at educationvoters.org. A recording of today's presentation will be available on our website and will be sent to you in the follow-up email, which you should receive in about 24 hours. Please share this recording with your friends and colleagues. If you'd like to learn more about League of Education Voters or support our work, please visit our website, educationvoters.org. Thank you again for attending. Each one of us has the right to feel safe and valued. Together, we will fight for a world in which true educational and economic equity exists. We look forward to seeing you at future webinars. Darsh, Isha, Jaden, Dr. Swinyard, Ben, Jenny, and Liz, thank you again for joining us, and thank you for all you do for Washington students, families, and educators. May you have a great rest of your week.